Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of Metal and Forge, a weekly podcast discussing manhood, entrepreneurship, American life, and matters of the soul. We're glad you're here. If you have not yet visited our website, it's mettleandforge.com. That's METTLE, mettleandforge.com. You can submit topics or questions. That's right. We're inviting you to be a part of this process. You get to shape the future of this show. We'd love to hear from you. So, gentlemen, Kent, Austin, my co-hosts, my name is Patrick Miller. Thanks for being here. Austin, do tell, you had just started regaling us with the tale of the buck that you shot. And of course, since you were talking about the price of venison being astronomical because of your, the way you've gone down the rabbit hole of that hobby, tell us about your adventures this week.
Yes, sir. So I went out opening day. It was kind of slow. It's opening day of gun season here. And
you shot this buck with a gun, Austin?
Yes, sir.
Spare us the story.
Man, no, it's a good one. Come on.
Yeah,
So I didn't see much opening day, and passed on a couple small ones, and then the next morning was Sunday, and my neighbor drove by and texted me and said, "Hey, I saw a nice buck run across the road to your property." I'm like, okay. And so I go out in the afternoon, and no sooner do I get in my tree than there's deer all around me. There's a hot doe. There's little bucks trying to breed the thing, and it wasn't having it. And I'm just like watching them, and all of a sudden in the distance I see horns. And I'm like, okay, he's a nice enough one to shoot. In the brush, probably 60, 70 yards away. And I'm like on him, watching him. And he comes out, and I probably shot too fast. And he kind of jumps away, and I'm like, man, that doesn't look like a good hit. So I wait 10 minutes or so, get down, and spook all the deer away. I go out and check, and I'm like, walk up to about where I hit him, and I smell like that I hit him, but I didn't see any blood. So then I start walking, and I find blood. And I just trailed him all through my property, and I live across from the state park. There's a vineyard between me and the state park. And I get out to the edge of the field, and I'm like, oh, no. And the neighbors are down on their patio, like a couple hundred yards away, and like, hey, he crossed the road over here. Like, okay. Yeah, he went in right up there. Someone got out and saw blood there. So I'm like, okay, it's like getting late now. So I get out and check. Sure enough, there's blood there. Pull back, call my brother. We go out after dark, start tracking the thing. There's blood. This thing had gone like probably 600-700 yards by now. But there's blood. So we're tracking it in the dark, and we look up, and we see eyes looking at us like 20-30 yards away. And this is in the part of the state park where it's like, it's a restricted area. You can't bring a weapon in there. Like, you can't bring your gun in. And it's after dark anyway. And so I'm like, oh boy. So we back out. I try to go to sleep that night. Did okay. Wake up in the morning. A friend of mine, we went out and went about to where we thought he was. Couldn't find him. Found blood. And I'm like, it's really disheartening injuring a deer. I hate doing that. It feels wasteful. It feels wrong. It feels like all the bad feelings follow. And we're like kind of going back to the truck because I'm going to call the guy with the dog. And all of a sudden we just stumbled across him. He's a nice 8-point, and I skinned him up today, and the meat smelled okay. So that's my story. So now I'm like,
Congrats.
Got the bucks
What
in
temperature? Yeah. What temperature was it overnight?
45 degrees. So it was pushing it.
Okay.
I mean,
But
ideally, it would have been below 40, but
yeah,
the meat didn't stink. So I think
good,
it'll be
right?
okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's fine. I put it in the freezer right away, cooled it off.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Sweet. What were you shooting?
308.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. I shot him low. I hit him real low. I thought I got shot. And by the time I got to him, a fox or a coyote had gotten to him already and kind of ripped his tail off, ripped into the guts a little bit. So
you just got there in time.
I did, yeah. So I'm like, whew, okay. So, yeah, venison is very expensive, bottom line.
Wow. Yeah, my grandpa used to shoot a 308, my mom's dad. And, man, he loved that thing. And he just loved to shoot guns. I mean, if he didn't get to shoot at a deer on any given day and you were hunting, you'd hear his rifle go off about dark because he just had to shoot.
You got to empty the chamber. Yeah.
Yeah.
They are fun. I kind of collect guns now. Like my dad collects guns, and I kind of got into it too. Like with real estate, it seems like I can pick stuff up for pennies on the dollar if I just look for the right deals. And I picked up a couple guns a few years ago. Heard of another deal. I've got like a lever action 44 mag Henry Golden Boy. I want to take out. I have my concealed carry permit. I do handguns, and it's just. Once you have one, you kind of want more.
absolutely.
Well, you need more. You need more.
Yeah.
Because one is none and two is one, like the SEAL teams say. So
exactly.
And you got to have one for everyone in the family. So, at this point, you're up to like a dozen or 15 guns if everyone needs two.
I'm like, I got to stop buying guns. This doesn't justify. But I guess they hold their value, right? I mean,
who cares?
Absolutely.
Sure.
It's a good I'm an American. I got guns.
I'd kind of like to get a lever action. What's on my wish list right now is a lever action, straight wall, big bore rifle of some, like something I could hunt deer with on my property. So I've only got 26 acres, and it's not super rural. Like there's houses, I don't want to be shooting something that goes 3 miles or whatever. So some kind of lever action, relatively big bore.
30?
Maybe bigger than that.
Okay.
Isn't the 45? Is there a 45-70 or 45?
Yeah, you can get a 45-70. Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, that's
maybe.
a nice gun.
Yeah. So it's on my
I have a
wish list.
44 lever action. It's a 44 mag, so it's the same round as what a revolver can hold.
Yeah.
I want to shoot a deer with that thing sometime.
That'd be
Open
fun.
sights, just hardcore.
Wow,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it's definitely deer season. There's deer all around. I see them, and my next door neighbor took a nice buck. His son took a nice buck off of their property, just probably 20 yards from our property line. So, yeah, I definitely need to get into it. Kent, what was your week like? What kind of adventure did you foster this week?
I can never remember, so I need to be prepared for a question like that because literally I don't even know what we did this weekend. The week was good, I think. The weekend went very fast. We had an excellent Friday night like we always do, and then there was a big UFC fight on Saturday night. So I got home from the office around 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, and I've got 3 hours to clean the studio, make the bacon wrap dates, go on a walk with the wife. I think there was one other thing on the agenda, and so that was like, by the time that was all taken up, it's 5 o'clock. I'm down here watching the UFC, and then a couple guys come over. They usually get here around 8:30. So that was a ton of fun.
Okay, so tell me about the UFC thing. So do you have to buy the $80 PPV like every weekend? Is that the deal?
No, there's really only about one of those per month.
Okay.
And those are the big fights. Those are the best fights typically. And then on most other Saturday nights, not all, but most other Saturday nights, they'll have a UFC fight night, which you can watch for free. If you have an ESPN subscription for $9.99 a month or whatever it is, you can watch those free fights, and they're good too. They'll have those fights a lot of times at like their headquarters in Vegas, and there's some people in the crowd, but not too many. Those fights I don't really even watch. But like they've had UFC fight nights in Austin, Texas, Nashville. They go to like mid-tier cities for those fight nights, and I'll watch those too. But pretty much every pay-per-view, you got to pay $80, and then a couple guys come over, and it's always a great time. But I just love it so much. And this one was a big. There was 3 fights at the end there that could have each been the main fight. It was just a really stacked card, and it was at Madison Square Garden. And Trump walks in with Mike Johnson, which I thought was kind of funny, Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy, one of his boys. I mean, the place went insane. It was awesome. And Joe's been doing the UFC since late 90s, I think, forever. And Trump's been a UFC fan since forever. But before Trump was on his podcast, I think they'd only met once and shook hands like once or twice. And you're talking about a couple decades of being in the same sport, basically. So Trump walks in. He goes over to John Anik, the main kind of host of the comment, shakes his hand and gives Joe a big hug. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Was the John Jones fight? Because
fantastic.
He's a Syracuse boy.
Rochester. Yeah,
Rochester,
John Jones is
okay.
from Rochester, and John Jones is, most would
Amazing.
say, including Dana White, would say he's the greatest fighter of all time, and he is spectacular. And he's been off for a little bit, but he came back in a really, really good form. He's been training with Gordon Ryan, the best guy in jiu-jitsu by far, and just he had some really good training partners for this fight. And, man, he just lit this other guy up. So, yeah, John Jones
Was
is...
it close?
No.
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 It really wasn't even close.
No, not
Really?
even close. No.
Stipe Miocic. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Okay.
Stipe's, won, the heavyweight since forever, but he's getting a little on the older side, and just John Jones is just, in a different category. So yeah, anyway, I was up till that didn't end until probably like 1:45, and then I wound up watching a movie after that because I was so amped up. So I didn't get to bed until like 2:45 on Saturday night. Slept in a little Sunday. So that was kind of the weekend.
Yeah, I love it. Did anybody watch the Tyson Paul fight, the boxing?
Yeah, it was stupid. It was dumb and embarrassing and ridiculous and should have never happened. And it's a black mark on Mike Tyson. It's a black mark on Jake Paul. It's a black mark on Netflix, and it's a huge black mark on boxing. I mean, that boxing is just, I don't know if this fight was exceptionally bad, but man, after you get used to the UFC, boxing is literally unwatchable. It's so dumb and so gay and just, it's just, the commentators are bad. The whole thing is just bad. I just can't. Unless that, and I know that fight was probably worse than a lot of boxing matches, but unless most boxing matches are at least 4 times better than that, it's no good. No, it was dumb. I mean, Mike Tyson walked out looking like a grandpa. He literally looked like he might be, my grandpa, walking out for a boxing match. He had nothing. Jake Paul was going easy on him. They both made money. I saw one post on X. They had a picture of one of the ring girls who's always lingering in the background, and they said the only winner of this entire fight was this ring girl, which I would totally agree with. Because it wasn't the viewers, it wasn't anybody else. It was bad.
Did you watch it, Austin?
No, I thought about it, but boxing, I've never enjoyed it. After watching UFC,
Well, I've not
isn't as
watched
much
any
strategy.
UFC, but I get the sense that with the rise of UFC and the culture, boxing has definitely taken a back seat.
It's true.
Just in terms of the pop culture awareness and enthusiasm about it. I have a little bit of a different perspective, Kent. I watched the fight, and it wasn't really exciting from a fighting perspective, but I did come away kind of, I've never been a Jake Paul fan. I thought, just kind of not the kind of guy that I thought was very impressive. And I came into the fight kind of, hoping that Tyson does well enough. I maybe somewhat of a redemption story. I mean, he's definitely been at the top of his game, and he's been at the bottom, and, you'd like to see him do well. At least I was kind of hoping he would do well. And from a fighting perspective, I didn't get that. But at the end of the fight, I thought there was kind of an interesting moment where Jake Paul respected him, kind of, did the whole, at the very end, he's kind of honored Tyson. And then the way that they talked about each other, it was interesting because Tyson, I forget who mentioned this, but there just wasn't that darkness there for him to go to. Like, he didn't have that. And I think that's actually probably a good thing for where Tyson is in his life, is he's kind of tamed the demons, and, you tap into that darkness to really find what you need to kind of fight at that level. And it just seemed like he didn't have that edge of darkness in him anymore. And that's, I came away from that thinking, he's faced the darkness, and, now why does he, why would he have any darkness to kind of tap into, to go? So I came away from it with kind of a mixed, a little bit more nuanced view of it, even though it was a relatively lame fight. And I don't think it was probably bad for Netflix, because in general, if you have a service as ubiquitous as Netflix, and then you have an event that's so big that it crashes your servers, yeah, you get a lot of negative press, but I'm not convinced that there's anything such as real negative press in terms of attention, and you got your name out there. So I don't know. It's interesting.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I actually love that Netflix is doing stuff like that. I really, really like that. It was just disappointing.
Yeah. I had a little bit more adventure on Friday than what I hoped for. On Friday around 11:30 or so, I get a phone call from my son, and he said, "Dad, I've been in a fairly bad crash." And of course, the first thing I asked is, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I'm okay. I think I might have broke my hand, but I'm okay." And so, right away, take a deep breath. It's like, okay. And so I looked up his location. I was already out the door as I was talking to him, and as I'm pulling out the driveway, I pulled up his location and I just headed there. And he was only 10 minutes away. But yeah, he pulled out in front of somebody and, some pickup, plowed into the side of his car, totaled the truck, ruined somebody's landscaping, and so I had to deal with that. And that was way more adventure than what I hoped for. But upon
How old is he?
He's 18. And
Ooh.
yeah, so I'm not sure. I think we may have just become uninsurable, but we'll deal with that and we'll figure it out. And I was proud of the fact that I was proud of how I handled it, because he's a pretty sensitive kid. And in the past, when he's gotten into trouble or gotten into scenarios where he could have used my help, I felt bad about the fact that he didn't always reach out to me. Case in point, a year ago or so, he was out of state and he backed into someone's car and he exchanged insurance information and there was a claim made. And I found out about all this because my insurance called me about the claim and I didn't have a clue about it. And so that's how I found out that he, had damaged someone's car. And I was like, dude, there are some things that, like, I appreciate you just like handling your shit, but there's things where I'd have rather just paid for the damage than to have that claim made on my insurance. So we talked about that. So I was happy that he called me. First thing, he called me before he called anybody else. And in fact, when I got there, nobody involved had thought to call the police yet. So we got that done. But my wife complimented me on how I handled the whole thing, which made me feel good. So
Was he hit on the passenger side, or how was he not hurt worse? If both vehicles were total and he was
side.
Okay, and there was no passenger.
Yeah, no passenger, and it hit the right front wheel, so it caved in the right. It was ahead of the passenger compartment, and the other car was a 3/4 ton pickup truck, landscaping crew, and yeah, just a boneheaded move, and he felt bad, and he should have, but I didn't yell at him or didn't really say much other than just, made sure he was okay. But it was kind of fascinating to be in a small town when something like that happens. So the car behind the truck that hit him was driven by, some local guy. And when I got to the accident scene, I noticed that William's football coach pulled up right at the same time I did. And here, the car behind the truck, had seen all this happen, noticed that William was wearing a Garraway football sweatshirt, called coach and said, "Hey, one of your boys looks like he's been in a crash," and told him where it was. And coach came and stood there and just hung out with us while we waited on the cops. And he stayed there for an hour and a half just to be there. And they had a playoff game that night, an hour away. And I'm sure he had a lot of other things he could have been doing, but he chose to be there for William. And it was just it was cool. I was impressed with coach and was reminded that it's good to be known in that way where, people are looking out for each other. So there's a bright spot in all of it. And
very cool.
The guy that owns the property that got destroyed, I called him and we talked Dutch and, we have a good understanding and we'll take care of the situation. It's going to work itself out. So a little more adventure than I hoped for, but he's been cooling his jets ever since then, borrowing our car here.
Live and learn, right?
Live and learn. All right, I'm going to key up our topic for tonight, talking about finding joy in the mundane. Obviously, we're all married dads with kids, and we've got businesses, and there's a lot going on, and we're busy as all get out. Sometimes it feels, like you can get in the grind. You can get in a bit of a rut. And the idea of finding joy in the mundane is one that we've kind of touched on a little bit before. But I think it's important that we think about this in the right way. It kind of plays off of our last conversation we had in episode 6 about fostering a sense of adventure in life. And we talked about how you need to foster some macro, bigger adventures so that you're awake and alert to the smaller adventures of life, the micro adventures that you can experience as a dad and a husband. And so kind of riffing off of that, finding joy in the mundane is, Kent, I think you mentioned the idea that sometimes it's easy to find yourself kind of living for the weekend a little bit. And, you know, you kind of get through the week and you're really grinding, and then you enjoy the weekend. You do some fun stuff, you know, watch some movies with your wife, stay up late, have a fight night with the boys, whatever it is. But then it's Monday morning, it's back on the grind. And pretty soon, if you're not careful, you might just do that for a year or 10. And you've just next weekend and then next weekend. And is that really all life's about? And I think we all, in a more sober moment, would say, no, that's not all life's about. And I'm curious, how do we defeat the kind of drag on us to really find the joy in the mundane on an average Tuesday night? For a number of years already, I've been reflecting on this idea that the kingdom of heaven is maybe most profoundly enjoyed and noticed on a mundane Tuesday night with the family, you know, sitting around dinner and just hearing from the kids and talking and laughing and being present with the unfolding humanity of those that we have given birth to. Your kids are all younger than mine, and so you're a good bit more in the thick of things in terms of the, you know, raising kids than I am. Although we do have a 5-month-old baby now, so I'll get to enjoy a bit more of that again. But Kent, maybe I can start with you. Just what's your experience of this whole thing of finding joy in the mundane? How do you not just wait, you know, spend your weeks waiting for the weekend so that you can relax and unwind and quote unquote have fun, but actually maybe shift your perspective to where you find a lot of joy and meaning, and don't find yourself just wishing for the weekend?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm looking for the answer also. But there is, you know, sometimes in particular, I think maybe it kind of depends on the season, but we've definitely been in certain seasons and probably are in one right now where it feels like a lot of times, you know, it's just, okay, a week is halfway through. Great. Now the week is over. Cool. The weekend. Oh man, now the week's firing back up again. It just seems so monotonous, you know, it just seems, and it seems like, you know, this one reel that I had seen on Instagram, which was pretty funny, you know, she was like, so this week we'll have the weekend, but then it's next week. And then it's just one more week until we get into the week after that, you know? And I just thought the way she did it in a humorous way, but it encapsulated, I think, the feeling pretty good, which is just like, it's week after week after week, you know? I mean, some of the head knowledge stuff that I've heard is like, it's great to have stuff to look forward to. I actually think that is a kind of a nice hack. You know, we had planned for my 40th, we were going to go to Opry Resort here in Nashville for 2 nights. And we'd planned that, I think, maybe back in August or something like that. And so, you know, the balance of August, September, October, we're both looking forward to that. It's something on the calendar. So having something, I think, to look forward to is, you know, it can be helpful. For me, I kind of fall into the rut mostly when there's not enough of movement. Like, I love when there's movement, like sales are good, and then maybe you're thinking about buying a property, and then, you know, there's something after that, like cash is flowing, things are good, there's movement, there's momentum, and then it's just kind of fun to be in the grind, you know. But when the grind slows down and you're still grinding, but there's not as much momentum, there's not as much movement, it doesn't, because there are seasons where you should do that, and you're not always going to be out there, you know, buying something new or all this other stuff. But those seasons still matter, but that's where it feels like you're kind of stuck a little bit, almost like you're a hamster on a wheel. But then, 2 years goes by, and then you look back and realize, man, I made a lot of progress. Like, this is something I was doing this morning, and I don't do it super often, because it probably takes an hour or whatever, but just kind of looking at, like, I started Amish Co. and Stored pretty much the same time, and it was about a year and a half ago, give or take. And so this whole last year and a half has been money out, money out, money out. And what I was looking at is just like, all right, it feels like we're just in this season where we're kind of grinding, but you're not really seeing the progress, or you don't feel the progress so much. So let's look at some data. How much should I have to invest in Amish Co. and Stored in October of this year? Okay. How was it October of last year? Oh, October of last year was way more. Okay. How about, January through June of this year versus the same time period last year? Oh, hey, way less. Guess what? It must be working, like, so just like noticing little things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Baked and free, sales are up. Awesome. And kind of comparing it, even though you're not out there, say, buying the next property, you can at least look at some data and see that, hey, you actually are making progress. It just tends to be, or it's mostly kind of maybe under the waves, so to speak. So, but, having things to look forward to, trying to get back to that momentum, that movement. And I assume not everyone's like that, but I definitely am. I mean, aside from that, I'm not really sure. I'm looking for the answers.
Yeah. Austin, you're a good bit younger than I am, and your kids are younger. How do you experience this? Do you find yourself at risk of getting bored or getting in the grind, getting in the rut, kind of experiencing what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so many thoughts, actually, because thinking about this over the last week, actually, just kind of frustrated, like feeling like I'm doing the same thing every day, just routine. And it's a good routine. It's not a bad routine. So I'm like meditating on it. Why am I dissatisfied? And most times for me, dissatisfaction comes from lack of gratitude. And so if I take that literally and count my blessings, like the song says, and that's what I did. It took me like 5 minutes to be like, okay, like Kent kind of just did that, actually. Like, went back and looked at the data. Like, the business is growing for me. My family is growing. Like, we are, my kids are doing well. Like, my family is thriving. The business is growing. And I realized, well, then why am I unhappy? Well, it's because I wasn't grateful.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't, giving thanks. And I think of this idea of contentment, and what does it mean? The best definition I heard of it is self-imposed satisfaction.
Mm.
And so, like, you look at, I love Paul in Philippians. He says, hey, I've learned how to live with everything. I've learned how to live with nothing. But I've also learned that whatever state I am is I can be content. And so he wouldn't be saying that if he didn't have everything and then have nothing and then have everything again and have nothing. And like, I can't quite grasp my head around that, because I'm all about, like Kent said, like advancement and growing, though it feels very slow for me right now. But there's something to that I've been meditating on, this idea of like self-imposed satisfaction. Gratitude is a key for me. Like, when I'm not grateful, I'm grumpy. And when I'm not grateful, if I'm not counting my blessings, I'm counting my cursings, like I'm counting my everything that's wrong. Like, for me, I'm just so black and white. I guess there's really no middle ground for me. Like, I have to go one way or the other. And the other thing is like, I've been meditating on too with this whole thing, is like, you think of, so our lives are like seasons, we're like like Jesus is like a farmer in my life. And so like, I just think about that. How long is the harvest season? It's like a month. So 1/12 of my time is spent cleaning harvest. The rest of it is spent in winter and in yucky, muddy spring and in planting seeds, making sure those seeds are taken care of. And there's one little tiny snippet of that season that's actually harvest. And so that's the other thing too. I think we always want to be picking the apples, but not realizing the amount of, dead times and pruning that goes through it. The problem is I found, and I've seen it in other people's lives, they give up when they reach that season of winter. And they're like, well, this just wasn't supposed to be because I'm going through a hard time. Like, no, that's not actually how anything in life works. Like, it's seasonal. It's just don't give up just because it's winter. Like, stick with it. You will grow. So I don't know. Those are kind of because I'm glad we're talking about this, because literally today I was like exhausted, spent most of the morning harvesting the deer, skinning it, and I skin and harvest my own deer, and that kind of threw my day off, which was fine. I knew I was getting into it, but then I only had the afternoon to get everything done, rush home, and I wanted to make supper because I wanted to make some fresh deer meat. And I'm like, man, did I bite off more than I could chew today? Then it was like 6:30 rolls around, time to start getting the girls ready for bed, get the girls to bed. Hopefully they don't scream and cry. Quickly on the podcast with you guys. And it's just like rinse, wash, repeat again and again and again. But, I spent some time this weekend or last week just being grateful, and that sustains me.
That's I'm in a different season right now. I'm building the Good King, and I'm quitting my day job. So I've got about 2 paychecks left or something like that, and that means my responsibilities there winding down, and I have more flexibility in my day to work on building my business. And so that's ridiculously interesting, but it comes with just, untrammeled anxiety too. The all of the openness in my schedule means I'm responsible for every minute. And there's no 9 to 5 to blame anything on in terms of my dissatisfaction. It's all me. And if I'm not happy, well, it's on me. And to your point, maybe it's on my attitude, and maybe it's on my lack of proper planning, or maybe it's, lack of gratitude, whatever it is. There's no one to blame but me. And Stephen Pressfield talks about this idea of resistance in the book, The War of Art. Have you guys read The War of Art?
Yeah, fantastic.
It's amazing. Yeah, I cried the first time I read it. It's an easy read. You should definitely read it if you haven't read it. But he talks about how resistance, and from the Christian language around this, is maybe temptation or the enemy. But resistance shows up in our life when we try to do something creative or do something that we were called to do, and then we get stuck and we can't move forward. And this morning I came into my office and I sat down and I knew what I needed to do. I had a piece of content I needed to create. And of course, the anxiety of the blank page, writer's block, whatever you want to call it, resistance, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I fought that thing all day, and I wrote and it all sucked. Pressfield said, just keep writing until it gets better, until it doesn't suck. And I didn't get there today. So it all sucked. But it was its own adventure in a sense. Like it was a terrifying and quiet and lonely adventure, but it was anything but boring. And so I think one of the things that comes to mind as I think about how do we ward off this feeling of the doldrums is our life has to be sufficiently challenging, but like we talked about last week, like not too challenging. Like there's seasons to that too. Sometimes you want to lean into the challenge and you want to really you want to test your mettle and see what you're made of. But then you also need a season of harvest, like you talked about. And it's going to be a while before I'm in a season of harvest. I'm in the very early stages of building, and there's going to be a ridiculous amount of work, for the next 6 to 12 months and maybe beyond that. But and there's really no one to share the load with or to be able to blow off steam with. It's, I'm the chief cook and bottle washer, and if it works, it's to my credit, and if it fails, it's to my blame. And that's ridiculously adventurous and interesting, but it's also terrifying and anxiety producing. And I'm just kind of sitting with all of that now. But that's one solution, is to take on a new challenge. If your life is too boring, maybe your job isn't sufficiently challenging. Maybe your career isn't pushing you in the way that you need to be pushed. And maybe your relationship isn't. Let's talk about relationships for a little bit, especially marriage relationships. So
Hey,
I find,
Patrick, hey,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. Before you moved on from there, I just wanted to say a couple things. One is that, I think in the season that you're in right now, 2 paychecks left, you're kind of in that peak. Fear is a strong word, but what is anxiety if fear isn't involved at some level? That I don't know that's going to be a whole year for you, but you're in that season right now. Like for me, it was the most intense a couple months leading up to that, and then a few months after that point. And that was kind of the worst of it. And so even if you work your butt off for 6 months, I don't even know if it needs to be a year, but the next few months for you obviously are super critical. But the other thing that I want to mention on that is I just think this is like a feature of being an entrepreneur. Because of the nature of being an entrepreneur, you're building something, and not very many of us would do it if all you got from it was what you were getting from it while you were building it. And
Right.
It is definitely, in nearly all cases, I think it is your work for maybe a decade, and it doesn't feel always like it's going as fast as you want it to go, or you're really getting to where you wanted to go. But because of the nature of being an entrepreneur, a lot of times you own the whole thing outright that you're building, or you have some amount of equity in it. Then I guess to sum it up is most of the time it feels like it's not working, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I didn't realize that was all happening. And then now you have more than you realized, in the building season, so that's just sort of, I think, the way it most of the time. So I just want to mention that before we moved on.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I took this risk, and I took the challenge of, quitting my job. I haven't been an entrepreneur for 20 years. And it's, I did this because it was going to kill me not to do it. If I would have had to stay sitting in an office under fluorescent lights, sitting in a cubicle, staring at an LED screen for 8.5 hours for the next 10 years, like I'd get sick and die. Like it's incompatible with how I'm made. And so I had to do it. And then it's the frustration of, well, I have to do it, but now I'm doing it, and I can't see even the next step. Like it's, the path just disappears, and it's all just a trust fall, and you're just falling into the abyss, but it's like somehow it kind of catches you, and I hope one day to look up and see, oh my goodness, like look at what we've built.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point Austin was making. Like you're barely in the season of even like planting seed. Like you're tilling the ground basically is the season you're in. You're plowing.
Yep. Yeah.
You're just getting started. So, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But before it gets worse, it's going to get a little bit better, and then it's going to get worse, and then it gets a little better, and then worse. That's just how it is. But if you can stay in it, and keep pivoting as you need to, as new information presents itself, then you adjust and you keep moving forward. But, and maybe you do something, help someone out on the side if you have to supplement your income or complement your income. But if you can stay in that crucifix, you are the most well-suited person that I personally know for something like this, extremely well-suited for it. You have the experiences suited for it, and there's high demand. So, you just need to stick with it, and go through the hard times because they make you better. But back to the mundane, and I always hate to be the daily habits guy, and it feels like I am a lot, but that is, I do pay a lot of attention to that with the mundane too, because I like to feel good about myself. And the one way I feel good about myself is Monday morning, no exceptions. I'm in the gym at 6 a.m. That's one day I do not skip. That sets Monday up good. It sets the week up good. And then, there's certain days of the week I want to get in the sauna, and then we kind of go nuts on the weekends, but the daily habits thing, for me, I fall back on those quite a lot. Like I feel like I have to fall back on my head knowledge a lot, because if my heart or my emotions feel like they're not trustworthy, then I just remind myself, no, this is what you need to do. You keep doing it. These are the habits. Just stick with it, and it will feel different, soon.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. The other thing I was thinking about with you, Patrick, was you have a vision, and if you didn't have a vision, I'd be worried. But where there is no vision, the business perishes.
Yeah.
We can replace people there with business or whatever it is. And I can clearly see from, the outside looking in, you can see something, and that's what you're going after. And that's what's going to build your momentum. And that's what's keeping you going now. That's what made you give notice at your job. That's what made you start the Good King Life. You see something. You're not just out there throwing seeds at random, plots of dirt. You actually have a vision. And, I think that's the most important thing of starting anything. I saw it with Kent too. I could tell when you were kind of getting done with, working at the church, it was a good season. It was a good time of your life. You needed that to recover from whatever you went through before. But I could see, I was like, man, he doesn't have a vision for that anymore. He needs something that he can see that's going to propel him forward to the next year and next season of life. So that's what I see when I look at you, Patrick, is someone with a vision. Just go with it, and it'll fly.
Thank you both for those kind words. It is, I truly pray that, this happens without me having to go take on auxiliary income, work, etc. But if I have to, I will, obviously. But no other path available to me would have led me into the depths with God that I'm in this moment. And, I want to separate that from any kind of religious language, because I think so much of our religious language that we have, we get accustomed to, and it grows thin and kind of loses its impact. So maybe a lot of men listening to this might have a hard time equating trusting God with a ridiculous adventure. But dang, it is an adventure, to exist at the edge, and trust God at the level that I'm trusting him today is just way beyond anything that I could have done in terms of pursuing God and his presence in my life, and understanding, more of him, seeing him show up, following his guidance, listening for his voice, the need to listen, the desire to be with him. All of that is just on an order of magnitude different than if I was, had stayed in my comfort zone, and nothing else would have done it. So no matter what happens with the Good King, the process of going through what I'm going through now is what I need in order to move into these deeper waters with God. And it's way too interesting sometimes, but I wouldn't really want it any other way. And I think a lot of times it's tempting when it gets this adventurous to bail. And I think of marriage in this regard because, well, a lot of marriages end in divorce. And what's so sad about that is that many, many times the golden thread, the golden path to the life that people seek is through the transformation that will come from staying in the difficult tension and working through it rather than bailing out. And so many people pull the ripcord and eject out of, I know I'm mixing metaphors there, but, hit the ejection button and get out of that tension. Because, if I would now go look for a job and get one before I've really found out what's going to happen, I'd never know. I'd never know what I'm made of.
Never know.
I'd never become the kind of person that I can be. And, part of me would know that. There's a part of me that knows that I would have bailed on it. And when we bail out of relationships that are in a difficult season, I think that's the price we pay for bailing, is that you bailed, and it's like, that sucks. So if you're listening to this and you're hanging in there and you're not sure how you're going to make it another day, I think your path to the life that you want is through the crucible. And I think that's true in our life in so many ways, but maybe none more so than in our marriage. The ancient language in Genesis that describes what Eve was for Adam, it says she was a helpmeet, which the ancient language actually refers to something. The Hebrew talks about it in a way that it makes it clear that it's something more like a beneficial adversary. So it's a relationship, someone who is close enough to you that they know exactly where to push on you to produce the transformation that you need. And they come against the parts of you that need to be resisted, and they amplify the parts of you that need to be brought forward. So that idea of being in a committed relationship with a beneficial adversary is something that is pretty foreign to our Western ears. But whether that beneficial adversary is in our marriage or if it's in another commitment that we've made in our life, the answer is through, not out, I think. And that's one of the things that keeps the spark in life, is to double down on that commitment, not hit the eject button.
I totally agree with that. And what is helpful, your comment about the answer is through, I think it's helpful to sort of have some ideas of what some mile markers might be on that direction, so if you're heading through or just going in circles. And so just a super practical example of this was, coming out of my W-2 income, coming into Amish Co., my thinking was, worst case scenario, I have to do some contract work or get a side gig while we get Amish Co. up and going. That never had to be the case, so that was great. So that didn't happen. But what did need to happen was, instead of me managing Amish Co., I needed to make the sales myself. So I had that commission income. So now I'm no longer a manager. I am salesperson. So that actually did need to happen, and I'm kind of happy that happened. And so I have to do the sales myself. I can't just be managing and working on the business. I need to work in the business primarily. And then the first step was for Amish Co. to start paying rent, and not me personally, not me paying the rent through Amish Co. Boom, that got checked off, I think, sometime this spring. And I knew this going in, like, these are the steps. And so now Amish Co. is paying the rent, but I'm still paying all the other expenses, which we have none essentially except for marketing. There's no salaries, none of that. So now Amish Co. is paying the rent, and then it took until basically mid-October for Amish Co. to start paying all of its own expenses. So we had cash built up, run rate of things. Okay, boom. Now Amish Co. is paying all of its own expenses. That comes off of me personally. Fantastic. Now we need to build up a little bit more cash so that we can potentially be thinking about when we want to pull a little money out of the business, because that's going to feel good too, and that's going to feel like momentum. That'll be another step. And then after that, at some point, I'm not the only one making sales. So I kind of knew going in, like, what the fallback plan was and what some of the mile markers were. And that's what I was looking at this morning, was like, all right, we are making progress, because last time this year, none of these things were true. And now these things are true. And if we keep going, how much better is it going to be next year this time? So having some mile markers, I think, is good. But on the mundane thing, this was the other thought that occurred to me. I am not the guy who's going to be talking about balance. I am not the guy who's going to be talking about there's this wheel and there's all these facets of life. You need to make sure they're all just right all of the time, because I do think that's bullshit, because the wheel is never right all of the time. The wheel itself is correct. I just don't think you should be going about trying to make that wheel perfectly round at all times. I think you should prioritize. Well, Elon Musk is the best of this. We talked about this just last week, I think it was. But on the mundane thing, I do actually think the one thing on that wheel that's maybe a little out of balance for Marianne and I right now is socially, because I think there's something about our social lives that's sort of like salt on food, and I think ours is just a little low right now. I'm not sure when we would be supposed to be spending time. I mean, I had the boys over at UFC. That totally counts. Like, that's kind of checking that bro time, you know what I mean? But like social events, like where you stand socially, that I think we're a little bit low on right now. So I think, as we're able to sort of notice some of the areas that actually do need to be brought up a little bit, as we're able, I think some of those things can maybe help with the mundane also.
Yeah. What do you think, Austin?
Yeah, I think I think it's Buffini and Company, one of the coaching modules, they said it's not about balance, it's about balancing. And I just love that. Because if you're fighting for balance, man, it's a never-ending fight. But if you're trying to balance everything that you have, everything that's thrown, it feels more manageable, because there's always some cog in the wheel. There's always something that's more emphasized. For you guys, it's, you're starting something. For me, I'm trying to, get back to vision again. I'm trying to get back to not necessarily to see a new vision. It's I need to see what I saw. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I find myself in this season of life, is trying to, okay, why did I do this? Why did I jump with both feet in on this business? I remember that. I remember going to Kent, who was my boss at the time, being like, hey, let's stop doing salary, man. Let's do commission. Why did I do that? And so, yeah, I think about that whole thing of like, for me, it's like, it's more about balancing what comes your way than trying to get perfect balance on 5 circles or whatever it is in your life.
Yeah. The thing I thought about as we talked about this is, Jesus said to seek first the kingdom of heaven and all these things will be added to you.
Right.
And that's been one of the frameworks that I've been going back to over and over again in this season is, well, what does it look like to seek first the kingdom and create this new thing, not from a place of striving, but from a place of restoring Eden? Because the project of being counterculture in the way that we are, if we think about restoring Eden and seeking first the kingdom, it's anything but mundane, and it affects every part of life. And if we truly and deeply engage with the project of restoring Eden, and I mean that like literally, because I think that's the way Jesus meant it, of us awakening to our union with God and using our hands and feet, our minds, our skills, our gifts, our talents to restore Eden in an ever expanding way in this present moment. That's countercultural. It runs against. It's an upside down kingdom. It runs against every instinct that the quote unquote world would have, and it changes your mindset on what you're experiencing. It changes the meaning that you make of the facts of your life, because the facts of your life are what they are. But if you understand the project that you're engaged in as the reintegration of humanity, the putting things back into proper relationship, like stepping into that role as a minister of reconciliation, putting things back into right relationship, that which the enemy has disintegrated and destroyed, like that's a hell of a project. And it's an endless project, and one that can be endlessly interesting and challenging. And if we look at our marriage, we look at our family, we look at our relationship with our businesses through that lens, it does imbue those challenges. It imbues the mundane with a rich meaning that kind of, in and of itself, is part of the solution of the problem of, falling into that rut that we talked about at the beginning of the show. So I think seeking first the kingdom, for me, is one of the frameworks or one of the pictures that I use in my mind to perceive properly the project that I'm engaged in. Like I'm doing battle, I'm bringing healing, I'm nurturing, I'm, fighting the enemy. It's as interesting as if I was at war. It's as meaningful as if I was, Mother Teresa. It's all of that, all in the kind of mundane details of our life. So I think that in that lies some golden nugget for us to discover. And I've only scratched the surface, but I do think that it's an area that our religious language doesn't sufficiently communicate the impact and the depth and the meaning that Jesus meant to communicate when he said to seek first the kingdom and all these things would be added to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. And that just makes me think of what Austin had touched on too, which is gratitude, which it just gets overlooked a lot. It actually gets talked about, I think, a fair bit, but I think it's one of those things that's easy to talk about and then kind of forget about. But, here's the thing is we're all going to be 65 plus before we know what happened. Dude, I'm telling you, it's going to be quick and we're going to be 65. And I think,
come on, man,
100%, dude. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to be sitting with our wives somewhere and just, being like, man, remember when we were 38? Remember when we were in our 40s?
Oh, no.
It just seemed like such a hectic time of life, such a busy time of life. And I remember it just kind of seemed like a grind. And man, those were the good days. We were young, we were healthy, we were vibrant. The kids were way too loud, way too obnoxious. But, that noise actually, what I wouldn't give for a little bit of that noise again. Like the point I'm driving at is I actually sort of feel like even though it's so, it does feel mundane a lot of the time right now. And also I kind of feel like this is as good as life's going to get,
Yeah.
These are
the good old days.
These are the good old days.
We're living the good old days.
Yeah. And in some ways this is the peak, I still think the best days are ahead because I think we can look forward to that. And I actually think the best days are ahead. But I do think when we're 70, look, things are going to be different when we're 70. Good grief, the body's already starting to break down at 40. How much worse is it going to be at 70? I mean, let's be healthy and strong and all of this. Don't get me wrong. I'm going for that for sure. But, there are unique and beautiful things to the season we're in right now that one day I think we're going to notice maybe a little bit more than we notice right now. And hey, if we notice them right now, then that just, I think, creates a positive mentality and leads to more good things.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the practices that I jotted down as I was thinking about what are the practices that I can incorporate into my life that help me to stay engaged in the actual project of the restoration of Eden and, seeking first the kingdom. One of the practices is to be vulnerable in the right context. When we allow ourselves to be seen, by our spouse, by our close friends, when we drop the kind of guard that we put up against the world and against the challenges of life, when we drop that and we allow ourselves to be seen and we are present with what's in front of us, there's a kind of vulnerability that is, well, it's interesting. It can be painful, but it's also interesting because it kind of goes back to that idea of allowing your wife to be that beneficial adversary, in a sense, is like letting her see the parts of you that you know need to be pressed in against and brought, challenged perhaps. And as men, it's easy to think, well, I'll handle that, or I'll get to that. But choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to allow ourselves to be seen, does open us up to the kind of growth that keeps us from getting stuck in those doldrums. And vulnerability looks different in different contexts, but in a marriage, which is in the context I was primarily thinking about it, and in family, as a dad, there's a little bit of tension between the idea of being out there and leading from the front and also having a certain kind of vulnerability. You want to be out there charging ahead. You want to take the next hill, but then when you're sitting around the campfire that night with your sons, you want to let them see that you're someone who can, you have wounds too. And there's a kind of vulnerability in an honesty in just admitting to that and opening yourself up to that with your friends or with your spouse or with your kids. And I found that out, as I went through the process of getting free from pornography, when after I confessed my sins to my wife, a couple months later, I shared my story with our kids. And it, opening myself up in that way, produced a dynamic in our home that it was safe to be open with each other in that way. It was safe to be vulnerable with each other in that way. And I think it gave my kids a gift to be able to, they can go out into the world and they know what they're up against, but they know they can come home and they're safe, to be who they are and to be vulnerable and to be seen and not have to keep up the kind of ego shield and try to pretend to be somebody. That's one of the ways that I think, looking back, I've been able to keep meaning and adventure in my life and not let it get too boring and dull. Thoughts on that? It's kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I don't like the word. I don't like being the word. I don't like, any of that. But what I think is there's like this spectrum between, I guess, insecurity and vulnerability. And I think in most cases, the less vulnerable you are, the more insecure you are. And you're not even going to want to admit that to yourself, but that's the truth.
It's good.
And, for guys like me that will probably never say the word vulnerable on my own free will, that you could think of it as being honest. You could think of it as being genuine. That's sort of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
Just being honest. I mean, and when you are honest, you are going to open up yourself to vectors of attack. And that is, by definition, making yourself vulnerable. So that's a tough one. But in the context of marriage, I will say that, we've always had what I just kind of feel like is probably the best marriage ever. And I'm sure that's objectively not the case, but that's how I feel. But it's a whole different thing in the last 4 to 5 years. And it's because of a lot of insecurities getting stripped away on my part. And, I guess by extension, becoming a whole lot more. Well, Mariana has seen me when I didn't have much to offer, and
Yep.
there is a vulnerability aspect to that. And I think that really, going through hard times like that together, where you stick together and you still choose to see the best in each other, there's something about that I think creates an even stronger bond.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the word is, you think about vulnerable in terms of battle, like vulnerable is weakness when it comes to battle. But yet there's this concept that is scriptural, yes, but I actually think it works in life too. That, I think of that verse, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And you could replace humble with vulnerable, because there's nothing more humbling than being vulnerable and honest with whomever it is. For me, it's easier to be vulnerable when I use that as my motivation. It's grace that I'm after. And I don't even understand grace, but I want more of it. Grace looks like so many different things. It's not just, grace can look like money. Grace can look like favor in business. Grace can look like a healthy marriage. Grace can look like so many different things. I think we kind of put grace in this box where it's only spiritual gifts, and it's so much more than that. That's my motivation for vulnerability. And we lead a care group, a small group in our house once a week through our church. And what I've found is the more honest that I am, the more honest they are. And obviously there's things that, you're not going to share every single fight you had in your marriage, that kind of a thing. But, there is something to inviting people into the journey, because I feel like in life, we love to tell our stories at the end. We
Right.
love to be like, hey,
That's right.
I did well in this.
Yeah.
This is my story. So a few years ago, we had trouble, and we had 2 miscarriages before we had summer. And there was a speaker who came to our church who's been all over the world, and he has a grace in his life for whatever, like praying for people, and then they conceive and carry the baby full term. And there was an altar call at our church where everyone knew me, and I'm a leader there. I wasn't ordained yet, but I'm a leader. And I remember there was a moment where I had to decide whether I was going to go forward and allow everyone to see me and Stephanie go forward in the middle of the pain. Literally the middle of the pain. I think we just had a miscarriage. In the middle of our story, and invite them into it, or say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want everyone to see my pain. I'd rather tell them at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
After
like on
you've
this
had another baby.
precipice. What's that?
After you've had another baby,
Yeah.
right? It's like then you talk about
Yeah,
the
exactly.
process.
After I've had a baby, then I'll tell them the story.
Mm-hmm.
And we went forward, and it was hard. And we cried, and there was people that came around us and held us, and we felt very loved. It still wasn't fun. It was incredibly difficult, incredibly humbling. But then we conceived 2-3 months later, and we carried Summer full term. And her name, Summer Rain, is prophetic. There's nothing like, you ever been in a hot day and you're just in the summer and there's a nice rainstorm? The air is cleaner. It's fresher. It's almost like something's changed. Something's shifted in the atmosphere. That's where her name came from. But guys, I can't tell you how much the church rejoiced, how much our community rejoiced with us when we conceived and we carried that baby full term. I'm like, why don't we invite people in the middle of the story or the beginning. Like,
Yeah.
why do we wait to the end? We wait to the end and call it vulnerability. I mean, that's not vulnerability.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
like,
good point.
I have issues now.
Yeah.
Like, I have
Yeah.
issues now. Something I
Totally.
think about. But I don't
Totally.
do it. I
That's
don't
so
do
good.
it perfectly, but yeah.
As you were talking, I was I just, there's this thing that came to me about power. And I don't know, I guess I'm being vulnerable in just confessing this, or just saying this. I want to be powerful. And I think we all do. I think we long to be powerful, but I think we're afraid that we might be powerful. And as you were talking about that story, it struck me that you being vulnerable in that moment gives you a kind of power. Like it's upside down from what you might expect, because we think of power coming from invulnerability, but it's actually the opposite. If you build in public, or you open, you let people into the pain or let people into the process, there's a kind of power that comes from that. And I just thinking about it now, I had a conversation online earlier today where I said something in my Instagram stories, and somebody from my community messaged me and said, "Oh, you just said that. Oh, snap." And I didn't
Gotta go watch this
think
now.
Yeah, go watch my stories before it expired. I didn't really think about it that much, but then when I reflected on it, I was like, like the fact that I just give no fucks in that regard, like it makes me kind of powerful in that narrow way. And I want more of that. I want to, and this gets to the other practice that I jotted down as, how do you keep from falling into the doldrums is, and Kent, you touched on this earlier, is speak the truth. Don't lie about a damn thing. It's like, if you say what you see and you say what you think humbly, but you're frankly just vulnerable enough to say what you think and what you see and what your experience of something is, and you don't lie, and you don't use your words instrumentally to try to accomplish some end, but you let them fall where they may, and you just say the thing that is true. Like, there's a vulnerability in that, but there's also an immense power in that. Like, if you're the kind of person who just says what you think humbly, rooted in love, and being curious, but just being honest, like, your life gets really interesting, and like, you don't lack for adventure. Jordan Peterson talks about that in his book, 12 Rules for Life. One of those rules is don't speak the truth, or at least don't lie. And he talks about how much adventure that will bring into your life. And it's true. It really does. I mean, if you stop being afraid of what people will think or judge you, and you say what you see, and you describe it as carefully and humbly as you can, yeah, you're vulnerable because then it's out there. But there's also some of the power that you longed for actually manifests itself in that way.
It's like that whole thing of grace. I mean, like, I think it's a spectrum. I think it's not humility equals, like, power can be grace. Like, I think it's the more humble or vulnerable we are, the more we receive. I don't know, I'm just processing through all this stuff, but I've been thinking a lot about that lately, because I've had people, "Oh yeah, we've been struggling with this for months, and then we did this and this and this and that happened." I'm like, who did you invite along the process? Like, who walked with you through this thing? Like, did you do this by yourself? Like, I'm so sorry if you did. Like, who did you invite? Like, I'm not saying you have to air your dirty laundry out for everyone to see, but man, invite people in the process. They're invested, you're invested. I don't know. It's just, I wouldn't get up in front of the church and tell them every single thing. But we invited them in our journey, and people cried. I mean, that's not the goal, but people were changed as a result of our openness. And I didn't want it. I resisted it all the way up to the altar, all the way up to the front, because I knew I was like, man, I don't have this together. I'm struggling with something here. I don't know how to have faith to have a kid. But not only were we transformed, but people were invited in the transformation process themselves.
Yeah.
It is interesting, isn't it, though, because, what some people would consider vulnerability, other people would consider strength. And you saying that speaking the truth takes a certain amount of vulnerability, Patrick, is probably correct. But I don't know that I would have ever really thought of that, or that would have been the first thought that comes to mind. Certainly wasn't. I think speaking the truth takes strength. It takes a certain amount of strength to speak the truth. And both things are true, right? Because you do actually probably do become more vulnerable when you speak. Actually, you become quite a lot more vulnerable when you speak the truth. But it also takes strength to speak the truth, And, the people that walk through something maybe didn't invite people in. One way to look at that would have been hey, we could have walked with you through that if you had been vulnerable with us in the kind of the valley, the deepest part of the valley. Another just as accurate way to state that was, hey, if you had spoken the truth to us about what you were going through in the deepest part of the valley, we could have walked with you through that too. So I guess the definitions are both correct, but that's just what stands out to me is it actually does, I think, take an incredible amount of strength to speak the truth. And I think that's why it doesn't happen more. And what we're not talking about is being a fool who just says everything. That's being a fool. And you need to know who to speak the truth to in which season, you don't
cast your pearls before swine.
Yeah, you don't cast your pearls before swine, because that's a principle too. But I kind of feel like most people are not speaking the truth. Maybe not because they're not willing to be vulnerable, because they don't have the chutzpah, the mettle,
stones,
the inner strength, the stones. Because it does take stones. Because if you are going to go, and this is just such a huge and powerful topic, Patrick. I mean, if anyone's ever heard Peterson talk about speaking the truth for 10 or 15 minutes alone, and he's probably spent, there's probably hours, of unrepeated content from Peterson on speaking the truth, why it matters, etc. But even if you only listen to him talk about everything that gets lumped in here and the power of speaking the truth for 15, 20 minutes, you're going to realize this really is a powerful thing. And I think at large in society, we've sort of lost it. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I think some of it's coming back, and I think some of it is due to Jordan Peterson. But it is a really important thing, because you can't speak the truth to others if you're not going to speak the truth to yourself. And
boom, that's right.
When you start speaking the truth to yourself, it is a motherfucker, because you can go through a lot of you can fool yourself, or unless this is just me, but I know I can fool myself for seasons and not want to think about what I feel deep down is true. But when you start just speaking to yourself the truth about what you see, that's the first step in correcting anything. And that is really powerful. And it does take a certain amount of strength. And then you can, I guess it goes hand in hand, speaking the truth to yourself and speaking the truth to others. But it's just such a powerful concept. And the ripple effects of it are exciting, to your point, Patrick. They do lead to adventure. It'll lead to change a lot of times. And even if the change seems negative in the short term, it's always going to result in a positive outcome over time because it is the truth. If it's not the truth, then it might not result in a positive outcome over time. But if it is the truth, it will always result in the best outcome for the most people over time.
Speaking of Peterson, speaking of that very thing, one of the things that he said that landed with me is he described the way he thought about faith as one of the definitions for faith that he likes, and this landed for me, is to act in such a way that to live out the belief that if I speak the truth, that whatever happens to me as a result will, by definition, be the best thing that could have happened. So having faith is living out the proposition that if I speak the truth, that what happens to me will be definitionally the best thing that could happen to me. And that's irrefutable, I think. Because, what situation are you going to make better by not speaking the truth? Even if in the short term, you've got to deal with consequences.
It's irrefutable because you are syncing yourself up with the laws of the universe, and no one at any point ever has or ever will beat the laws of the universe. The best we can do as a human being is increasingly put ourselves in sync with the laws of the universe. And they are there by design, and they are perfect, and we will not beat them. And truth is one of the things that is baked in. So when you start speaking the truth, you are putting more of yourself in sync with the laws of the universe, and they are undefeated.
100%. You can either run at cross purposes to the laws of the universe, or you can live in harmony with them in an ever-expanding manner. And to the extent that you live at cross purposes to them, it's like you're running into the fan blades of life, and it's like you just keep doing that. And it's suffering, it's disintegration and destruction and disease and everything else. And it's why seed oils are bad, right? It's like they don't adhere, they're not in harmony with some of the laws of the universe, and so it causes disease in your body. It's not the kind of fuel that your body needs, and so you're in your very diet, you're eating something that that puts you in an oppositional position to the deepest laws of the universe. And it's like, well, no wonder you're suffering, and we do that in our relationships and all of that, and we do that when we don't speak the truth. And we don't speak the truth because of shame and fear and, insecurity you mentioned and all of those. But, this conversation reminds me of the next point that I was going to bring up, which is another way that my wife and I have kept our life from getting dull is we have established this promise to each other that we will enter into these deepening conversations about what are our deepest fears and our deepest desires. So there's this interesting dynamic between fear and desire. And I think, Austin, you might have mentioned that, speaking the truth to yourself, maybe Kent, you said it's like speaking the truth to yourself first is where it starts. And we don't even speak the truth to ourselves about what we're afraid of or about what we want most. And then when we don't get what we want most, we resent that. And then we live in the resentment that causes us to experience, not the life that we want. And speaking the truth to ourselves, even just sitting down. I tried doing this exercise just in the last couple of days, sitting down and writing down. It's like, what would have to be true in my life in order for me to feel better than I do now and to be happy with the outcomes in my life? It's like, turns out I actually know. That's a hell of a thing to realize. It's like the suffering in my life, like I know the extent to which I'm the cause of that. Like I know what I'm doing that's causing me to not feel as good as I could feel in my body or in my mind or in my marriage. It's like, I know. It's like, why don't you say that to yourself, bitch?
Yeah. Because of the bitch part.
Yeah, right?
You know?
It's so hard.
We've all
it's
got
so
that.
hard. But
We've all
when you
got
start
that.
doing that, yeah. But it's like when you are brave enough and strong enough to go, you know what? This part of my life is not up to snuff. And I'm just going to call it for what it is. I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah.
Things get better.
There's something.
That for me has been the hardest thing with speaking the truth to myself, you know, in the last season, is that exactly. Realizing how short that, too often how short I'm coming up on my own standards, you know?
Right.
I think it's just, you know, like you said, I mean, we were talking about it earlier, just something about speaking the truth that brings it out from the realm of darkness into light. And now it's not ruled by the dark anymore. And like, sometimes we don't even know what the truth is, you know, in our own lives. We think we do.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like it's like I feel like insecurities are like an onion. You know, there's one layer that's get peeled back, and then it's this ever evolving thing of arriving but never getting there, I guess. And I think that's how it should be. Like, I think we should constantly be striving for more depth in our relationships and more wholeness. Like my wife and I talk about this a lot. Before we both got married, we really worked hard at what we call wholeness. And for me, it was working a lot on just my struggle with pornography and purity and, you know, just having a vision for that part of my life. And, but we both did the work, and as much as we could. And we've been married 7 years now, so obviously we've been married probably the shortest of anyone here, but I feel like that's been so monumental in our relationship is we learned how to be honest with each other or with ourselves so we could get married and be honest with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like we have a perfect marriage, but we have never gone to bed angry at each other. We've never had a fight that's lasted more than a day, and there's never been knockdown, drag out one. And I'm not saying we're perfect, but I just feel like it has to do with that whole thing of being honest with yourself carries over into so many more areas than just our marriage. I mean, that's definitely one that it applies to a lot, but I think it works in business. I mean, I think it works in, you know, other relationships, this whole thing of being honest with ourselves. Yeah, my mind's still like processing through all this, but I'm really enjoying this one.
Yeah, totally.
It's important.
One of the things that we did that was helpful as it relates to speaking the truth about what we want is we just got really practical with it. And this was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I noticed that when I was coming home from work, MJ had been busy with the kids, stressful. She was running a little small business on the side. She had a lot going on. I had a lot going on. Life was, you know, we were in the thick of it. And when I'd come home from work, her way of kind of indirectly communicating to me that her life was stressful was without saying so, she was kind of wanting to reflect to me the stress that she was under so that I would just know that she was stressed out and I would, you know, take whatever responsibility I needed to take. And so it's like, you know, that's not what you want to walk in the door to every day, right? It's, you know.
Oh, yeah. Dude, I'm just laughing because when Mariana tells me, let's say she was on a phone call with someone that was stressing her out, she will recount the phone call in a way that stresses me out. Like it's not like objectively saying, you know, what they said and I said this. It's like what they were saying then, and it's just like the way it's communicated stresses me out, you know. But it's not like it's not like it's something I need to sit down and talk about. I'm just laughing because I get what you're saying, and I think in some ways, when she recounts something like that to me, it's her way of sort of offloading it, I guess. But then I feel like I'm stressed. Yeah.
Right. But in a really practical way, we just, you know, we just sat down and I said, you know, the 15 minutes after I get home from work, that's a pretty small part of our day, but it's not nothing. I mean, if it's 15 minutes, 5 days a week, and it's every week for the rest of our life, you know, it's a not insignificant thing. And if we can get that right, maybe we can get the next 15 minutes right. And, you know, it wouldn't hurt to try. But, you know, I had to be vulnerable enough to tell her, you know, what I hoped for. Yeah. And in a way that recognized my own shortcomings. And, you know, it's like, you know, you sit down and you're like, you know, I'm blind to a lot of things and I'm kind of a son of a bitch. And you know, you might not be the brightest thing because you married me. And so here we are, but we're committed to each other. And, you know, and so like maybe if we are honest and humble, maybe we can figure out 15 minutes, you know? Yeah. And, you know, what I would really like is if, no matter what you're going through, if we could just take a few minutes to, you know, where I could give you a hug and I could look in your eyes and remind you that, you know, we're on the same team and we're pulling for the same goals. And like, just let me know how I can help you rather than huff and puff around the kitchen, you know, and kind of,
there you go.
Yeah.
You know, with that tension and whatever else that you're trying to kind of, you know, reflect to me in an unspoken way. It's like, what if we just didn't do it that way? But we, you know, what if we just smile? What if you welcomed me and I told you how much I appreciated you and we just looked into each other's eyes and we just kind of took a moment to reset? You know, it's like, could we get that 15 minutes right? You know, and that's just a small example of going, you know, our life is made up of these moments. You know, if there's something that is causing us resentment in our life, and it's not the way we want it to be, you know, if we're humble and curious and careful and honest, you know, we can get it right, or we can at least get it a lot better. And it's not going to be perfect, but it does make life rich. And that goes back to the, you know, the habits, you know, are my habits leading me into a place that's good? You know, and have the courage to look at it and have the courage to talk about it and be honest about it and honest about where it's good and where it's bad. And most of all, be honest about what you really want and, you know, what triggers you, what you're afraid of. And when you do it that way, your life can get really good, actually, like ridiculously good.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that so much. That's powerful.
You know, and one of the frameworks, again, for making our life better in marriage in that way, and it's kind of related to what we were just talking about, was like when we got stuck on stuff, and when we do get stuck on, you know, maybe it's a disagreement we're having or whatever. What's the guy's name who turned me onto this? He's University of Toronto professor, not neuroscience, but something in that realm. But his name will come to me. John Vervaeke. That's what it is. John Vervaeke. He's awesome. And if you look up John Vervaeke on YouTube, you will be rewarded. But he talks about that there's really two kinds of conversations you can have in relationship. One, and he uses the Latin terms to describe them. One is Philia Sophia, and one is Philia Nikia. And the way to remember this is Nikia means victory. And that's, you know, where the name brand Nike comes from, being victorious. So Sophia means wisdom. So Philia is love. So it's either a conversation that's grounded in a love of wisdom or a love of victory. So every conversation is either coming from an energy of seeking to understand, seeking to be wiser, or seeking to win, seeking to land points, seeking to score. And those are two vastly different energies behind a conversation. And when you're speaking the truth, it matters whether it's coming from a place of Philia Sophia or a place of Philia Nikia. So if you're coming from a place of, I'm speaking the truth, but I'm speaking the truth because I want to win. It's like I'm using my language to win and to score points, and I know I'm right, and screw you. That's not going to lead you to the promised land. But the kind of conversation we're having here, which is Philia Sophia, which is I want to be wiser, and I'm curious and humble, and I'm willing to say what I think and say what I see and hear what you say and think, then we can all move forward. We can all better align ourselves to the patterns of the universe, the patterns of the laws of God in some ultimate sense. We can harmonize with those highest patterns when we have conversations in the spirit of Philia Sophia rather than Philia Nikia. So some Latin, which I always love, but...
Well, I'm really glad that you tacked that on to this conversation about truth, because that is critically important when it comes to speaking the truth. And it's just a really great, I've never heard that before, but that's going to stick, because the two things that I have thought of before, kind of in the entrepreneur world, is, like when you're meeting with your management team, I always like to think of it as like the problem's on the table and we're all discussing it together. You might have an opinion that agrees with mine, and you might have an opinion that agrees with his over there, but we don't need to be confrontational about this. That's actually not very helpful. Let's put the problem in the middle of the table and let's all discuss it together. Let's all look for the best solution on that problem. And if you have a partner, that's an even closer relationship, and there's something that's coming up that maybe they think one way and you might think another, let's not envision ourselves sitting across the table from each other going to, having a battle of wills. Let's sit on the same side. Here's the problem we're trying to fix. Let's solve this thing together. That's just another way to say exactly what you said. And I just think that is really, really important. It's very powerful. And you sort of pick up on it when you're going about engaging with people. You can sort of pick up on in their speech whether the way they're going about things, if it's to win or to seek wisdom, which is another way to say to find the best solution together.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the things that has made Rogan so powerful in his podcasts is he doesn't have Nikia conversations. Like, he doesn't go into a conversation with a point to prove or trying to win. Like, he's trying to understand. And I think we all, we latch onto that. That calls to something good in us.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think you're right with that too. I think of that a lot, with when I just love to talk to people with opposing views. I had a conversation the other week about abortion, and I know where I stand on the issue, but it's always interesting to understand, or to seek to understand where other people are coming from with their views and their framework and everything. And I think it's good for us too, just to be curious in a healthy way. And that's the tough thing about, for me personally, being curious about myself, is that I'm just realizing that shame is a liar. And so if I do something wrong, if I sin, if I treat my wife wrong, or whatever it is, and I'm under shame, I can't actually see the truth. I can't actually, shame is this thing that robs me of truth I'm figuring out. And I'm realizing that there's a lot more shame in my life than what I realize.
Mm-hmm.
And there's areas where I'm trying to get into to understand why there's a pinch point there, why I don't want to go there. And I know that there's shame there somewhere. I just don't know. I'm doing the work on it right now, and I'm like, man, where is... something's lying to me. I'm lying to myself here somehow. So I love what you said there. Motive matters behind whatever it is. And I agree with you, Kent. It's you can tell when you're trying to solve a problem and somebody's there to be right. I'm like, get out of the room so we can solve this thing.
Yeah.
That's what I want to say, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Austin, I want to say this. If you're doing work on shame, I did a lot of work on that because I did not realize how much of my life I was dealing with so much shame. I don't recall what this book is, but I'm 95% sure Brene Brown has a book on shame.
Oh, I love her. Okay.
And it's the best one that I read because I wound up reading like 3 or 4. One or so wasn't that good, but there was 2 or 3 that were, 2, maybe a couple that were pretty good. But just from memory, but I'm pretty sure Brene Brown's was the best.
I like her stuff anyway. I'll check it out. Okay.
Yeah, shame is ubiquitous, and it does keep us from moving forward in so many ways. I mean, I'm no stranger to shame. I still have shame in my life. And, you know, it's funny because, and it's not funny, it's stupid in some way, but, you know my story. I talk about my struggles with pornography. I was unfaithful to my wife, and, you know, I lived 17 years of, you know, increasingly debaucherous lifestyle, hidden, lying, you know, and I've been able to find a way to talk about that. It's like I've received God's love in a sufficient manner to overcome that, heal that shame, and be able to just talk about it in a way that, you know, is powerful and provides.
But that's how you know you're healed, right?
Healing.
Yes,
Isn't that
it
interesting?
is.
Healing.
Because
Or
you can talk
healing.
about it. Like I heard this podcast recently, and she was talking about she had a rough upbringing, and she said, you know, she basically watched her stepdad throw her mother through a wall, and she was like, in the moment, she was like, I'm just free to talk about this because I've done the work and I'm healed from it. And that was such a revelatory concept for me that I'm hearing you, Patrick, like talk about these things. I don't feel any shame there. I'm sure there's aspects of your life where you feel it, but that's how I feel that you know that you're free from this because you're talking about it, and there's not a cowering there waiting for someone to hit you kind of a thing. You're just like, well, it happened. I did it. I'm dealing with the consequences. It doesn't take the consequences away.
Right.
But I'm embracing them, and I'm moving through it as gracefully as I can, and I'm here to talk about it in a way that's not shameful, but it's not just to set me free, but to set others free. That's how I feel like you know that you're free from something, when you can talk about it, and there's not that waiting for someone to hit you concept or like feeling.
Well, shame grows in the dark and dies in the light. So that doesn't mean it's all gone. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean you're completely healed, maybe. But if it's in the light, one thing you know for sure is shame is dying. And if it's not at all, it's probably growing.
Yeah. Well, the part of my life that I have the most shame around today and the most limitations around is money. I literally will tell people what I did in my acting out and my addiction and all of that, but I won't talk to them about my money. You know, I won't tell them about that I'm not proud of where I am financially. You know, it's like, I guess I'm saying it now, but even I'm overcoming some resistance to saying that now here, even though it's like in the context of this conversation. And, you know, I think like in our community here, money and how much money you have and how accomplished you are with your money is actually probably more important to people than your level of integrity in your sexual life. It's, you know, extraordinary how people value that. And, you know, I think I'm on a journey to healing in this way, but like, man, I literally would rather stand in front of a group and tell them about, you know, the strip clubs and the massage parlors than I would tell them about my credit card bill. The honest truth.
Move to New York. Move to New York. You feel just fine. Bar's pretty low here as far as lawns manicured goes. I mean, not a lot of people driving SUVs versus minivans, so.
Yeah. So it's wild how shame locks us up.
This is a good one, man. I might have to go back and listen to it again. I'm really enjoying this, but
Yeah. It's and you know, I guess in saying that, what I just said is that's the adventure of our life, is you keep going up to the edge and you know, peering into the darkness and shining a light into it. And it's, it's always an adventure when you do that. And I think one of the things that to bring it back to Mettle and Forge is testing your mettle, speaking the truth, being honest about where you are and what you see from your vantage point and what your experience is of the facts of your life. Like, that makes you stronger. And it's a blessing to other people. Going back 6 years or so after I met Christ and I became free from the compulsion with lust and pornography and sexual acting out. I still that remained hidden from everyone. I had hidden that for 17 years, and even after I got free, I still didn't bring that into the light for another year, just because it had been my biggest fear. Facing that had been my biggest fear. Being found out about that had been my biggest fear for my whole, for 20, 30 years. And one of the arguments that God made to me when I was wrestling with him on this, because I read Peterson's book pretty soon after I met Christ, and his chapter, the Holy Spirit used Peterson's chapter on speaking the truth to convict me. I read that and I was like, shit, I can't unread that. And I kind of wished I could have, because I saw that it wasn't just, by not speaking the truth about where I'd been, I of course was robbing myself of the opportunity to move on, but I was also robbing my wife of the healing that she would receive from the pain that I was going to inflict on her. And Peterson lays that out, how it's not just these sins of commission that we, do wrong things, but it's also not saying the things that need to be said. It's like when we omit saying things that need to be said, we rob everybody else of the value of that perspective and that truth, even if that brings pain in the short term. And, I was literally laid out on the floor, crying into the carpet in the middle of the night, begging God to take this cup from me. It's like, do not make me go through this door. Do not make me do this. Like, it was a Garden of Gethsemane moment for me. And one of the things, it's so strange now to think back on it, but one of the things that beckoned to me, in the direction of the truth and the direction of light, was the love that I had for my wife. It's like, I could see, like, God showed me that, yes, I was going to bring her great pain, but that he was going to bring even greater healing, even greater glory through my obedience to him. And, I kind of had to throw myself on the sword to go, yeah, well, I need it for my life, but you know what? I trust back to this idea of, if I speak the truth, that whatever happens to me will be, by definition, the best thing that could happen to me. And it has been. So that's a principle that I try to live by now.
Yeah. It's a powerful one. And your story's, it's an example, That's something that people can take inspiration from. Because sometimes speaking the truth is really hard.
Oh, it's the hardest thing. So hard sometimes. But interesting. It certainly keeps things from getting dull.
Absolutely right.
Back to the beginning of this conversation.
Exactly. I don't want to cut this off, Patrick, but I got to go soon.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up. Do you want to plug anything? Where do you want people to connect with you, Kent?
Oh, I say some really, really interesting stuff on X at Kent Lapp.
There you go.
Check it out. All right. Kent Lapp on X. Austin Wine Trail Properties.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook now, but that's about it.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you for being here. Y'all can connect with me on Instagram at goodking.life. I look forward to seeing you there, and you can check out my website at goodking.life as well. So, good conversation. Appreciate you, brothers. Look forward to the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Night.
Love you, boys.
Yep. Love
Two.
you too.